So today I want to talk about using Google Data Studio, and in particular I'm going to use it with the USA Names Google Public Dataset, right? So that particular dataset, let's see if I can find it here amongst my, right, so here's the data set itself. It comes out of the Social Security Administration. Let me talk just briefly about what all this is, right? So back, you can see actually here, back in 2005, Nick Parlante out of Stanford had created this nifty assignment. Nifty Assignments is a track within SIGC each year, and they have, as the name suggests, interesting assignments to use. And so he actually talked about using the Social Security Administration's database for creating a program to graph the popularity of baby names. Now you can see here actually, and there's right. So this is from a number of years ago. One is his data set actually only gives decade by decade information. The other thing is that it also only gives the top 1,000 names for that particular decade, right? So it doesn't give us a real full picture. Now, if you hunt around on the Social Security Administration's webpage, right, so here's their stuff about baby names and all of that, what you actually will find is that there's a much more detailed data set. I can't remember if it's this one. Yeah, I mean, this will actually kind of show you, right, so top 100 names for that and so forth. But the data set behind this is actually available in Google Cloud's public data sets, right? So the Google Cloud public data set, if we come here for USA names, right, we can actually look at all of this stuff here. If I go down here and I just type in USA names, we can see that yes, we actually have a few different things. So under USA Names dataset, we have USA names from 1910 to 2013, or from 1910 to current, right? So if we take a look at that, we can see here are the individual fields that we have, right? So state, gender, year, name, and number. And basically here's the information about that, right? Number being the number of occurrences of the name, of that particular name in that year with that gender and that state, right? So a preview of this looks something like this, right? So we have each record is for a name in a given year with a given gender and state, right? So in Ohio in 1910, there were 1,099 female Marys born, right? Then in Ohio in 1910, there were 698 female Helens born, right, etc. And so, as you can imagine, since this contains data year by year, that is, if we do a quick query here, let's go to our details so I can get the table name. Yes, right, there's our error there. That is that there's a colon right here, and that actually needs to be a period. So then when we run this, we can see the unique years. They go from 1910 all the way up to, next page, 2018. Okay, so that's the most recent year on file for this particular data set. So that's a lot more data than Nick Parlante was parsing, was dealing with in 2005. The other thing is that I wanted to create sort of a modern day visualization of this as well, right? Again, I really love this assignment. I've used this assignment in a number of different ways in various kinds of classes and things. Really interesting. But now here we have what you could arguably say are the proper tools, namely SQL database, and something to easily visualize that stuff with, namely Data Studio. So what I want to talk about is how to build this little dashboard here. Okay, so I have this dashboard here. Here's my baby name's popularity, right? So what it does is by default it shows you the, I think it's 10 most popular names, and this is a timeline. It's a time series, so you can scroll along and then you can see how those are. But what's actually really interesting is these particular filters here, right? So here, for instance, I could say something like I could look at the name Pat, which is sometimes male, sometimes female, and when we do that, we can see this was the popularity of Pat across the years, right? We can also come down to here and we can see roughly male versus female. We can also pick particular states that we might be interested in, right? So I'm living in Florida. I may want to only be interested in the number of Pats named in Florida, right? So we kind of go through and we see a bunch of this stuff. Now, just a couple of little things about the data set in case you're curious. You'll see, notice we have some where they're 0, some where they're 5 or 6. The way the records essentially work, again, if we come back over to our preview of the data, if there are not at least 5 in terms of the number, then that isn't recorded, and supposedly it's done for privacy's sake. Okay, so the minimum that this number value can be is 5, right? And that also kind of gives you a heads up in terms of understanding some of the other lower numbers and things like that, right? So here, we had 5, so there was undoubtedly one state that had at least 5 Pats there, right, and so forth. And so we can actually add additional names in here, right? So we could have something like Jesse. This is another. Oops, sorry. Yes, when I did that got rid of Pat. Let's just add Pat in there. Checking that box, right? And then we can see the relative popularity of those things across time. Okay, so that's one example of something we're going to look at today. Another one here it shows in this little line chart basically the names based by sex. So we can easily put in something like Jesse, and we could see we can watch over time here basically the number of males and the number of females. So we can see very early on it was predominantly a female name, right? And then we can see that here around 1948, it switched over where the male version was more popular, etc. Right. Let's take a look at another. Here's another view of the same kind of data, right? So again, I could plug in something like Jesse here, and then we can see that. Then we can see this in a slightly different picture, right? So this entire thing, this is showing percentages on this axis. So we can see the relative percentages in the two colored areas. Okay. And then just one more, which is showing us the total number of births across in each year, going up to 2018. So that's what we're going to actually look at building. So let me actually just move this out of the way here, and what we'll do. Let me open up Data Studio here, and I'll create a blank report. And so let's start this off, right? So the first thing it's asking us for is data itself, right? So we're going to use BigQuery just like we've seen before. Okay, and I'm then just going to select my billing project, right? It says there are no, let me see. not my projects, I'm sorry, public datasets, that's what we want. So public datasets, we're going to use, there's my billing account, right? Then in terms of here, I should be able to, I think, type in, yes. Right, there's USA names. So that's the data set, and then we have our two different tables. So we're going to use the one that has the most data, namely current, and we'll add that to our report. So we add that here, and we have one of these kind of table kinds of things here and everything. And there's certainly a lot of things that that you can do with these kinds of with this sort of thing. Just to kind of give you a very quick glance at this, right? So I could add in, for instance, the name itself. I could actually drop out state, and then record count is deceiving. That's not the number of people with that particular name, right? That's the number of records regarding that name. If we want to know the actual number of people, right, what I could do is I could put this here as a metric, right, and notice it's selecting sum by default, so it's summing up those numbers. And so here we have a very quick little view of the relative popularity of different names. And if I clicked into view for this, I can scroll down through here and view the popularity of everybody's name. Right. So there's a bunch of things we can do like this, and it can depend on, whether you want it summarized in a dimension or whether you want it, whether you want it summarized in a metric or whether you just want it listed in a dimension is really up to you. But there's a lot of options for this kind of thing. Okay, but that's not the one that I want to talk about so much. What I actually wanted to talk about, again, is looking at how to create this chart here. Okay, so notice at the bottom, the x-axis are years, right? So really what I have here is what Data Studio refers to as a time series chart. Okay, so let's take a look at building that. All right, all I'm going to do, come up to add a chart right here. And here are our time series chart. I'm going to pick the first one, and then I'm just going to place that somewhere on here, kind of drag it out like so. Okay. Now, with this selected, you'll see right up here there is data source. If I click on that right now, there is my current data source. Some of these are actually queries I've written for other things, so yours won't necessarily show that, and we'll see actually how to add in custom queries in a little bit. Right. So this is our time series data right here. Okay, so then the question becomes, what settings do we actually need for all of this? Okay, I'm just going to make that a little bit bigger. Okay, so first of all, our date year dimension. Now, notice here it says year. What I actually am probably going to need to do, right? So here it's seeing year as a number, right? That 1, 2, 3 there. If I click on the little pencil here, what I can do is I can come over to year and I can tell it, hey, look that's not actually just a number. That's a date time thing. In particular, it's year in 4-digit format, right? So we go ahead, we say, yep, we want to do that. We click OK, right? If you really wanted to make your life a little simpler, we can even delete that chart again. Okay, so I'll delete that chart. Now I'll just go back over to the time series. At this point, it should properly kind of pick up some of that stuff, right? So now notice, in here as the dimension, it selected year. If we had a way of, there's also ways of allowing people to select via across different dates. We're not really going to look at that. But here it's actually showing record count, right? So again, the way that we want to do this is, remember, what we're interested in is how many people were named a certain name. So I'm going to drag my name part down here, and I'm going to add that as a dimension. Right, so when I add that as a dimension, here I get a bunch of records here, right, up at the top, and I'm seeing their record counts. But again, what we want is the sum of number. So we'll actually put that as our metric. And so now we have this little view here that when I go ahead and view it, we see something that's very similar to what we saw initially, right? We saw our baby name popularity dashboard, and it looked something along these lines. Okay. Now, here we're just tied into seeing the top 10, right? If we want to change that, right? So let me go up here. Let me just do baby names demo as the name. So what we can do now is we can add in filters. So if I come up to the filter control here and I drag this over, right, there's a filter that I have, and you see that it actually automatically put in name for me. Now if that's not the one that I wanted, if I wanted something like gender, I can just move that over here. You'll see that gets updated like so. I did actually want name, so I'm going to put that back. Now let me show you what happens when I run this right now. Right, so when I run this right now, when I go to name, it says there were 5 million James, right? Notice it's actually showing me different values for those names. Now let me show you what's going on with that, right? So again, when I select this, notice that the metric is sum of number. A lot of times this will default to that. It will default to record count, and then that gives you something that isn't really what it was that you're looking for, right? Since we're really talking about how many people were named that particular name, right? So again, there, if I'm going to display a metric there, I think that the sum of the number is probably going to be the best thing. Okay, so that immediately gives us the ability to control this chart. Now I can come into here, and for instance, I could type in my name, right, like so, and see what that looks like across time, right? I don't know. What else should we look at? How about the current president? Right? Oh, sorry. Yes. Again, so the way of dealing with that, right. So if you want multiple names on there, right, you can do that. So there's the popularity of the name Donald. There's the popularity of the president's son, Eric. Right. Again, you can look these. You can look up whatever names you want. So John, Paul, George, and Ringo. Oops, sorry. And Ringo. Turns out nobody named, well, at least less than 5 people in a given year in a given state named their kid Ringo, right? So there's the Beatles names popularity. So again, we can look at a bunch of things, breaking them down that way. Now, once we have that, then we can add in the other types of filters that we had as well. Again, I can add another filter control in here, and I can just move this over, and then that's going to be our gender control, right? So I'm just going to move gender. Oops, sorry. Grab gender. Drop that down onto the dimension, right? Here it is saying record count. Again, I want sum of the numbers. So then when I'm looking at a particular name, what I'll actually see, actually let's do something like Pat, right? With Pat, now we can see there were 22.7 thousand versus 37.6 thousand. And again, so you can look at just the females, you can look at just the males, etc. And then finally, since they have it, let's also add in a filter for the state. Right, so again, I'm just going to create this filter control here. And that one will be the state. And again, we'll make it sum up the numbers. And so then, for instance, we could just say, let's look at just California. What were the most popular names in California? Right there they were. What were the most popular names in, I don't know, Alabama? And again, you can look, you can basically break that down into male versus women. So I could say, oh, okay, let's take a look at just the most popular women's names, right? There, those are, right? And then we can actually work through other stuff as well. Okay. So again, you can pick out various ones that you were interested in to see that. So the nice thing about this is that you get a lot of functionality really quickly. Okay. So let's take a look at some of these other things, right? We had this view, the names by sex view, right? Again, this is a really easy one to do. Also, we can add in our headers like I have on the thing. I'm not going to bother to do that right now, just to save time. So I'll add another page, and then I can create yet another time series. And the thing about separating by pages, one is it just provides a convenient way to organize things, but two, also for those filters, right? So if I want to have only one kind of filter, so notice here I actually am allowing for 3 different filters. If I had other charts on here, these filter selections would actually change those charts as well. Versus something like this, where we want to show the name's popularity by sex. Here I'm actually going to want to kind of play around with this a little bit differently, right? So like before, where I broke down by name, this time I'm going to use the breakdown dimension here as gender, and again we're interested in the sum of the number, not the record count, right? So there's our names by sex graph, and then what we can do is add in a filter for the name. And then we can see things like Pat, easy, very simple, very straightforward to set up. Not a whole lot of nastiness going on there. Let's look at the percentages, right? So we were looking at this table here. So we'll add another page, and this time I want the 100% stacked area chart. Right, it's a little bit different. Now, notice it actually already picked up the year for the bottom dimension, right? Here it's doing breakdown based off of state, right? So we're just going to change that to gender here, right? Once again, fix this up to be the sum of the number, and then easily add in name. So doing that now makes it fairly easy for us to look at things like such. Right, so there's the name Jesse, which I talked about before. We can see the relative popularity between men and women there. All right, now the last one. All of the ones that I've shown you so far are using the raw data set itself. Okay? And sometimes that's fine. For your exam, you're going to actually be writing a number of custom queries for things. So you'll actually need to know how to do that, right? So here I have just a real simple time series curve showing the number of U.S. births in each one of the years. Technically, it's actually the number of Social Security cards applied for newborns in that given year. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at building this. So I'm going to go back over to Edit, and I'm going to go to Add a New Page. So the first thing we need to do is we're going to need to add a new data source for our custom query. All right, so I'll go to Add Data here, and I will go down to BigQuery, and then we'll go to Custom Query, and I'll select my project that I want built for this. And then here it's asking me for a custom query. Now, before you enter in whatever you want to run here, what you should do first is to try it out. So try it out either in dbeaver or try it directly in BigQuery itself. In my case, I'm going to simply do this directly in BigQuery right now. Okay. So what I actually want here is to write a query that shows me the total number of births or number of babies per year. So we will select the year, and then I'm going to sum up the number field to give me the total count of babies in that particular year. Then I'll have from, have my backtick there, right? Then once again, to get back over to the correct name if I need it, it's right here. And I can paste that in. Make sure to put in that. And then I'm going to go back over to the colon right here. Change that to a period. Okay. So we have that stuff. And then basically, so it's giving me an error. The reason is that I am going to need to have some group by going on here, namely minimally year. And let's try that. Right? So I can run that like so. And that gives me the following. Now, for the most part, it does look like they are in order, except we may want, if we really want to ensure that that's the case, we could actually put in an order by clause as well, something like that, right? And again, looks like it's giving us the same results. Now, based off of that, what we're going to do is I'm just going to grab this code here and copy it, and then I'm going to come back over into my custom query and paste in that particular code. So I'll go ahead and click Add. And yes, we still want to add that to the report. Right, so now it should actually be in there. Let me go to Add Chart, and again, we're going to do a time series here. Now, the first thing you should notice is I have a data source named BigQuery. So the problem is this: whenever you create custom queries, Data Studio doesn't give you the option when you're creating the query to give it a name. In the case of the final exam, you're going to be dealing with multiple custom queries, so you're really going to want to provide a name for each of these things. And the way you do it is quite easy. That is, once you've found your BigQuery thing, your BigQuery data source here, and you could click on this and you see other ones, right? Actually, here's one where I slightly screwed up the sequel, so this is take 2. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on the pencil next to that, and now it's going to give me the option to rename the query itself, right? So I'm just going to call this number of, say, num babies per year. The other thing I'm going to do is, since I am doing a time series, notice it's picking out the year as just a number. As we saw before, generally we're going to want that as 4-digit year. So we'll do that. And I'll click done. Now with this, right, and you have to be careful, sometimes this doesn't update right away, or sometimes when you create the query you don't see BigQuery listed there. Just do a quick refresh, then you should actually see what you're supposed to. Okay, so again, now our date dimension is going to be or the dimension is going to be year. Right, it did record count. Here what we actually want is total count, and we can get rid of record count. It's thinking very hard. And there it is. Right, so that's the number of US babies each year. And again, and so we could add in a nice little make a little more room for it, and then I can just grab this easily and center that over like so. So that should give you a basic idea of how to start playing around with Data Studio itself, as well as how to use Data Studio to visualize your own custom queries.